this story about a guy named Charles Littlejohn, excuse me. Charles Littlejohn was you can read up about this at American Prospect. Reuven Avi Yona wrote about this yesterday. Charles Littlejohn, about 20 days ago, began serving a 5-year prison sentence for unauthorized disclosure of tax information. He was a contractor with the IRS. He stole documents associated with public official A, who was Donald Trump, and provided it to news organization One, which was the New York Times. And then Littlejohn also stole tax information for thousands of ultra-wealthy individuals, uploaded it to a private website, and provided it to news organization Two, which was ProPublica. And the tax returns included folks like Elon Musk's, Jeff Bezos's, and Mark Zuckerberg. The idea that the guy got 5 years is just absurd. Under sentencing guidelines, apparently, his maximum sentence was 10 months. But the district judge, Anna Reyes, sentenced him to 5 years on the grounds that others must be deterred from doing the same. Now, first off, highly unlikely that people are going to do this. I mean, if people, the idea that it was just one guy who did it after 4 years with Donald Trump, or 3 years, is pretty shocking. And you're going to get caught. The chances of you not getting caught are pretty low. But this is a public service. This is a public service. It is important for the public to understand that the ultra wealthy are getting away with murder in terms of their taxes. In fact, Littlejohn's sentence, according to this piece in the Prospect, is exceedingly harsh relative to people who have actually evaded their taxes. I mean, the seriousness of a punishment should be a function of the seriousness of the crime. And the seriousness of the crime should be a function of what does it do to the public? Who is injured here? And what is the nature of the injury? And when someone doesn't pay their taxes, or evades taxes, or sets up shell companies to evade taxes, or offshores money, they're hurting everybody in society. Everybody. When someone reveals what the ultra wealthy are not paying in their taxes because they figured out a legal way of doing that, they're helping the public. They're helping society because they're making us understand what is going on and why we may have some issues like wealth inequality, for instance. I think he's quoted in this piece, but Gabriel Zuckman was writing a piece in the New York Times entitled, It's Time to Tax the Billionaires. He's an economist at the Paris School of Economics and the University of California, Berkeley. And he wrote, until recently, it was hard to know just how good the super rich are at avoiding taxes. You can find this in the New York Times. Public statistics are oddly quiet about their contributions to government coffers, a topic of legitimate interest in democratic societies. Over the past few years, I and other scholars have published studies and books attempting to fix that problem. While we still have data for only a handful of countries, we found that the ultra-wealthy consistently avoid paying their fair share of taxes. In the Netherlands, for instance, the average taxpayer in 2016 gave 45% of their earnings to the government, while billionaires just paid 17%. And the bottom line is that this professor, the scholar, would not be able to give us a sense of what's happening in the United States were it not for Charles Littlejohn. And what he found out is that in the 1960s, scroll down, we can see maybe that graph, the 400 richest Americans paid more than half of their income in taxes. Now, you know this because I have spent many times saying that the top marginal tax rate in the 50s and 60s in this country was 90%. In the U.S., the top marginal tax rate, no, don't show this yet because that's not what I'm talking about. The top marginal tax rate was 90%. So in other words, if you earned over $450,000 at that time, I think it was $470,000, which would be about $3 million. Every dollar after that $3 million would be taxed at a 90% rate. Prior to that, it went up in tiers. That's what progressive taxation means. That's what tax brackets are. Not all your money is at 90% if you go over 470. It's just the first dollar after 470,000 or 3 million in today's dollars would be taxed at 90%. Now, people take tax deductions. People hire accountants to find tax shelters. So the effective rate was closer to 50%, 55%. I don't know, maybe a little bit higher. But now the wealthiest Americans, the top billionaires, this is in 2018. They probably got even a break during once the Trump tax cuts kicked in, paid half of that, 23% of their income in taxes. Here it is. This is this one here. Let me put this one up. This chart right here shows you that in 1960, the effective tax rate for the 400 richest Americans was at 56.3%. Now, to be clear, the number of Americans who are probably like in that same sort of zone today, it's probably, a little bit bigger, but relative to the 330 million people, probably not. And the amount of money that they have on the other side of that $470,000 a year is much greater. In other words, they're hoarding all the money. Put that back up. I just want to go through it. And then you can see it dipped in 1964 to 52% effective tax rate. It popped back up in the 60s. And then in 1970, it was still at 52.7%. That's even after John F. Kennedy's tax cuts, dropping the marginal rate to 70%. He got rid of some of the loopholes. And then when we get into the Reagan era, we start taxing capital gains differently than we tax labor, essentially. In other words, if you make money from your money, you get taxed less on that than making money from actually working. And the way it's justified is supposedly, well, that money is making jobs for other people. But the reality is nobody's making jobs when someone makes more money because their stock portfolio has gone up. In fact, We're now at the point where stocks go up when people lose jobs. No one's getting hired because your mansion or your huge tract of land goes from $2 million in value to $25 million in value. No one's getting money because your Bitcoin went from, whatever it was to whatever it is. That's sort of like the hoodwink, if you will. And that's like when, Warren Buffett used to say his secretary paid more in taxes than he did. It's really screwed up. We need higher taxation. And the problem is not just in terms of like we need it for, our budget or our debt, because the actual reality is we don't. But this type of wealth disparity, it diminishes competition. It impoverishes more people. It causes our politics to be completely skewed. Because billionaires had the ability to pick up the phone and talk to Eric Adams or to the president of Columbia University and say, I don't want those protests from those college kids. Send the police in, send this in, send whatever. And I got news for you. If you think that's the only thing that they do, you're nuts. They are creating policy. They are influencing policy. They have access to people because of the way that money operates in our politics. They also have the ability to say, you know what? I'm smart. I've made a lot of money. I'm going to do a little experiment with education in the United States, like the Gates Foundation. And I'm going to drop $1 billion into the system and see what happens. And then I'm going to follow it up with a couple other $1 billion through other means. And then 15 years later, you hire a company called the Rand Corporation to assess how does the Gates formula of education reform work? And they say, actually, it's really bad. And we lose generations of teachers because of it. And 2 generations, 3 generations of students go through school with these high stakes testing, and their education gets messed up. Or one of them says like, hey, I don't want there to be high-speed train between San Francisco and LA. I'm going to do everything in my billions of dollars of power to derail it. I'm going to pretend like I got something called the Hyperloop, which is nothing but a tunnel, so that the value of my car company is maintained. This is the problem with billionaires having this much money. This is why we should outlaw billionaires by simply confiscating their money through taxation. You want to keep 100 million? Maybe we can have 100 millionaires. We can move from there. We should have a wealth tax, and we should completely narrow the capital gains preference for taxation to investments that clearly have a value to society. A really explicit one, which probably is about 4 or 5% of what actually gets written off as capital gains.
And as you're saying, Sam, it's like it's its own form of governance in a way. Like for example, the Adams example. Like those are not state actors in any way influencing, city policy towards people. And the same thing with that oil meeting, where Trump basically pledged to those guys, hey, if you give me $1 billion in funding, it's carte blanche. You write me a bill, I'll give it to you.
100%. This is a huge problem. This is the problem why, why antitrust is so important. It's the same, it is the exact same dynamic, because these people are monopolizing the money. The amount of wealth concentrated in the hands of so few is an antitrust issue, frankly, because it decreases how much democratic power we all have and the accountability for elected officials, because they can hide behind somebody with billions of dollars. That's just the reality. This country, in terms of economic prosperity, did the best during what is known as the Great Compression, that is in the 50s and 60s, where wealth inequality was a fraction of what it is today. A fraction of what it is today. So check that out. There's all sorts of issues with this, but the most blunt instrument to deal with this is to raise taxes on the ultra wealthy and include a wealth tax. And the idea that we couldn't do a wealth tax is a complete fiction. The idea that we can't tax unrealized gains is absurd. We do it every single day. Everyone who owns a house pays taxes on an unrealized gain. That's why property taxes go up. That's why they send an assessor out to assess your property. If we can do that with every single house in the country, with every single piece of property in the country, we can certainly do it with, I don't know, the top 400 wealthiest people in this country, or the top 1,000 wealthiest people in this country. Of course we can. Be very lucrative. You know where actually a billionaire tax is really going, is successful? It's a millionaire tax in Massachusetts. State officials said Monday that the voter-approved surtax on high earners has generated more than $1.8 billion in revenue this fiscal year, with still 3 months left to go. That means state officials could have hundreds of millions of surplus dollars to spend on transportation and education initiatives. If people feel more comfortable with the federal government just simply empowering the states, but most states are not going to do this. $800 million has come in that is beyond what the government had planned to spend in fiscal year 2024. Voters approved the measure in 2022 to levy an additional 4% tax on annual earnings over $1 million. And the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center, a left-leaning think tank, projected it could generate $2 billion a year. State officials last year put their estimates slightly lower at $1.7 billion a year. So far, it's vastly exceeded those expectations, generating nearly $1.4 billion alone last quarter. I don't know. Maybe we're going to anticipate some type of huge capital flight from Massachusetts. Or maybe these people make their money in Massachusetts and are like, I don't want to leave. But it doesn't matter if people are leaving, because the revenue is still exceeding all expectations. People left during 2021 and 2022. And you know why? Because it's freezing cold in Massachusetts. And if you're locked in your house and you can't go outside and you can't eat in restaurants, then you leave. But state's population rebounded last year with a gain of nearly almost 12,000 residents from July to July. So there you go. It works. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.